Hi, Niall O'Sullivan. Thank you so much for coming on the Mary-Jess Meets podcast. How are you doing today?
Good morning. Great. Thanks very much for having me on. Looking forward to our chat.
I've been looking forward to our chat for a really long time now because Grace, my friend Grace, our mutual friend Grace Foley, mentioned you to me and just said, oh my gosh, you need to get him on the podcast. He is so interesting. He is just such a lovely person. And I was thinking, great, this sounds amazing. And so thank you so much for choosing to come and spend your time with us on the podcast, because you sent your bio over and my goodness gracious me, the amount of names that were in there, and I was going, my gosh, this is absolutely amazing. But I think we'll get onto that later, because I like, with my guests, to start from the very beginning and then discover things as time goes on. So I purposefully haven't looked up too much of your stuff, because that means that I get to ask really authentic questions as we go through as well. But I really want to ask you, first of all, to start from the very beginning, as I said, and talk about how you got into music and what was your start of your musical journey.
Okay, yeah, well, a very good place to start for sure. I started playing in a local marching band here in Dublin, Ireland. My two older brothers, Garrod and Shane, joined this band. It's called the Artane Boys Band. I think it's like 190 years old at this stage, but it's now called the Artane Band, so boys and girls are allowed in it. Originally, it was part of an orphanage, and that's how the band was one of these kind of activities that the boys had to do many years ago. So it was not like that when I was there at all. So this was the local marching band, and they rehearsed their marching and their playing in a yard right behind my house. So on a summer's day, I could hear them playing all the time. And then they used to have annual concerts in the band room for the parents. And I used to obviously get dragged along to those, listening to this band play annually. But it was so loud, I remember covering my ears and thinking that was an awful racket. And the instrument that I was kind of attracted to, I guess, was the trumpet, because I remember going around a few times, when not during the concerts where there's like 50 musicians playing really loud. I remember going around to the band, and my both brothers had friends who played trumpet, and one of the theme songs they liked to play was the Match of the Day, BBC soccer theme song, and then Gaelic, the GAA, the Irish football and Irish hurling theme song, the Sunday Game. So they were the two songs that I really, really loved, and the lads played them for me when I went around, and I was like, yeah, I'm totally going to play that, because my mother didn't want me to play clarinet like my brother Garrod, or the flute like my brother Shane. So I had no choice, so that's the instrument I picked. And this marching band actually play in Croke Park, which would be the equivalent of Wembley Stadium, for the Gaelic Athletic Association games. They would be the halftime entertainment and pre-show entertainment or pre-match entertainment for the games. And it's an amateur organization, but you'd still have like almost 90,000 people attending these games, and the athleticism from the players is like at a professional standard. So anyway, that gave me a great grounding into performing, because the band was 5 days a week. So straight after school, you went around. After school, you go home, you'd have a bit of food, do your homework, and you go off to the band for 2 to 2.5 hours, 5 days a week. And that was right through 52 weeks of the year, with the exception of maybe a week at Christmas and a week at Easter. But you were also expected then on a Saturday or Sunday, if there was an engagement. So you could be anywhere up and down Ireland, playing in any parish hall or festival or anything. And this was all under 16. So between, you joined the band when you're 8, and around sort of 11, 12, you start to do these engagements. So you could be basically from 12 to 16, you're non-stop performing. What was also great about the band was it was great, and it kind of was a bit of a hindrance at the time, but they've rectified it. You didn't get lessons. You were handed the instrument. You're kind of given the very basics of buzzing for the trumpet, or they kind of just looked at your teeth and said, okay, you suit the trumpet, and off you went with a scale chart and the fingerings, and you kind of figured it out. And the older boys would kind of teach you a few tips and tricks. But the thing about that was, it was great because you got to figure it out yourself, and then the lads would help you. But also kind of, you picked up an awful lot of bad habits that later on sort of you had to iron out and took a lot of time. But I have to say, it was an amazing foundation, great foundation, and a great introduction to the business, but also to playing the instrument.
That is a commitment. Goodness me.
You actually, would you believe, you had to request holidays off your parents if they wanted to go on a family holiday? You had to request. Also, you weren't, at the time, it's different now, it's a bit more flexible, but at the time you couldn't like play football or hurling or anything, because you'd be missing band to go training, and they didn't allow that. It was 100%,
Wow.
100% in or not at all.
Goodness me, it sounds like the criteria for a job, not an extracurricular activity.
A lot of the guys in the band went on to the military bands or the police force bands here, so the Garda band or the Army band in Ireland. So loads of members of those bands are ex-Artane players.
Well, that intensity obviously didn't put you off. You obviously really enjoyed your first taste of show business and being in a band. You obviously enjoyed it, so you wanted to keep going. It sounds, you talk about it glowingly, so.
Yeah, so I guess sometimes when you see your friends from the road growing up and they had the freedom to play football, you were a bit envious that they weren't going to the band. But I loved it. Like I was terrible at football, so I loved playing the trumpet. It was something that I felt I was better at than other activities like football, etc. I got my first taste of, I guess, showbiz when I was about 10. So I think it was 10 or 11. Perry Como, the American singer, the really, really famous crooner, was doing a special from the Point Depot at the time in Ireland, which is a huge venue. I think, I don't know, 10,000 or something. I'm not exactly sure. So they're just looking for, like, basically the only criteria you had to be was small and short and are young looking and basically be able to hold the tune. So we, four of the younger lads were put into a uniform. This was our first engagement. It wasn't even playing the trumpet, so we had to sing a little song and basically take Perry Como by the hand and walk him from like the back of the auditorium to the stage. And that was a concert like these PBS concerts that they have in America. That was a concert that like had the RTE Concert Orchestra, whom I'll talk about later, Palestrina Choir. There was loads of guest artists on it, like a special TV special from Ireland. However, I don't think as bouncers were aware of the fact that there was going to be two little lads in a blue and red uniform taking Mr. Como to pass on two other young lads to then bring him up to the stage. So when we went to take him, they were kind of pushing our hands away, so they weren't aware that was actually planned. And the place went absolutely crazy when he was there in Ireland, and he wasn't even that well. Like, he was quite old at the time, and he had to take a break. The show went on for hours, but I remember just from the very first moment, I was just absolutely hooked, and I couldn't believe the reaction of so many people. And it was just a really good experience and exposure to showbiz, I guess, at quite a high level, like as best as it can be. And then when that was all said and done, I never sang again publicly since. It was all trumpet playing, but it was around the age of 15, when I had about a year left in the band, that I started looking. Someone told me about the National Youth Orchestra of Ireland. Now, I didn't even know there was a National Youth Orchestra. I didn't even know what an orchestra was. I knew what an orchestra was to look at, but I didn't know like how it was made up. So I remember someone just said, you should go for the youth orchestra. Like, at this stage, there was a bit of a change coming into the band where it was run by Christian brothers beforehand, and then they'd sort of started either kind of going their separate ways or they were dying, and kind of lay people came in and started running it. And some people with different experiences of how to run stuff started bringing in tutors and stuff. So this was kind of 8 to 15. I kind of didn't really have a tutor, and then there was a brass specialist brought in, and he said, you should go for this. So I went for the National Youth Orchestra. Didn't really think anything of it. Presumed I wouldn't get it, because I was thinking like, well, it'll be the top 5 trumpet players under 18 in the whole country going for this, or whatever. I didn't even know how many trumpets there would be in an orchestra. And then I got a letter to say I got in. I couldn't believe it. And then I remember showing up, because they used to do a course at Christmas time and then a course at the summertime. And I showed up, and I was looking at these things. It was like a bassoon. I'd never seen a bassoon in my life. I was looking around for the saxophones. I was looking around for the euphoniums. There was no sign of them. There was like 5 or 6 French horns, and I'd only ever seen one in a room at the same time. So there's all these different things that I was really experiencing for the first time. And it was straight away, like it was a Tchaikovsky symphony, and we were rehearsing and lots of other stuff, and like hundreds of string, well, it looked like hundreds of string players, but it was, you know, first, second, thirds, our first, second violas, cello, bass. And I'd really never been part of a body of musicians like of 100 plus. It was always about 40 to 50 in the band, which was amazing. Like, but then when it got to this symphony of sound, literally, I was hooked, and that was it. I was like, well, this is definitely what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life.
What an amazing experience. I've never played with an orchestra because I don't play an instrument. And it's always something that I've thought, gosh, I'd love to know what that feels like. But the only thing I can probably relate it to would be singing in a big choir, and that elation that you feel when you're all singing so passionately and making beautiful music together. That is an incredible feeling.
Yeah, it's really special, and it is like as I progressed, and obviously this is now a profession, you get paid for it, and it's great. It's great that you can still get that feeling, but also make it your living as well. Now, you don't get it all the time if something doesn't go according to plan, like the performance isn't as sharp as it should be. But like when it's on point, it's brilliant.
Yeah, there's no feeling like that. It's the one way you know that once the adrenaline has died down, you can sleep easy because you've done a good job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm really surprised after you explained your first singing engagement so happily that you haven't sort of gone back to singing at all. Is it just, do you still feel like you've got a good voice in there somewhere?
Yeah, I'm absolutely amazing in the shower. Bathroom, it's not so good. I sound amazing to myself, but when anyone else listens, I feel like they're in a bit of pain.
No, anybody can be pro in the shower, definitely. And the main thing with singing is that you enjoy it. That's what I say to anybody.
But no one else does.
Well, moving on back into your trumpeting then, because that obviously is your expertise and your passion. What happened after the National Youth Orchestra? Where did you go after that, and where did your training continue?
Yeah, so there was a kind of I don't really talk about this actually at all, really. I think it was mentioned once before. Around that time, 15, when I got to the youth orchestra, and I was like, this is absolutely what I'm doing. Like, I'm literally like, there's nothing else. Because everyone at this stage, I would have been thinking, what will I do when I leave school? And obviously didn't want to do the doctor thing or the lawyer thing, because I was just not in any way interested in school or academic in that way. It was always just playing the trumpet is all I knew. And I was like, well, I'll just have to make it work. You know, I was thinking if I could get some students and then do some playing, and this will all be perfect. But an incident happened. It was very funny. Well, it wasn't very funny at the time, but actually I had to get a checkup. There was a family condition, and something was discovered. I had to go to a checkup. We all had to go and get checkups. And they discovered that there was like basically a little hole in my heart, right? And the doctor said, basically to me, he was just like, and you do any sports? No, I'm in the band and I do play trumpet. He goes, oh, well, that will be the end of your trumpet days. You can no longer play the trumpet. And I just kind of thought to myself, I don't know if that's true, like, you know. So I just kind of ignored his advice. A year later, I had a procedure or an operation, and essentially there's a little spring or a coil in the heart there. And yeah, I actually think this is the first time I've talked about it actually publicly. But yeah, so that was a moment that I remember thinking, I don't know, like, why is he saying that? Like, it hasn't caused me any stress up to now. And obviously, over 20 years later, I'm actually fine, I think. And so I just thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to really do this to the best of my ability. So after the band, so I had the operation and all that, ignored the doctor's advice, and I went to the College of Music in Dublin for a couple of years, had lessons there just while I was finishing off school. And then I went to the Royal Irish Academy of Music for about 4 or 5 years. And after that, I went to the Royal College of I started to do quite a bit of work in Ireland. I was doing loads of teaching. I think I had like 50 students a week at one point, which was brilliant. I was delighted at my age to be to be earning quite regular money. I was terrible with it because I didn't budget for the non academic year, so I was broke in the summer. I was in my early 20s. I was just having a ball. But then a few years later, I just said, you know what, I want to not teach as much and I want to perform a lot more. So I auditioned for the Royal College of Music in London to possibly go into like second or third year of a degree program, but they offered me postgraduate studies. And so I went over to London and I did a postgraduate diploma in performance on scholarship at the Royal College. And then I was finishing that. It was just 1 year. And then they said, well, we'll give you a scholarship to come back for the second year. Will you do it? And well, okay. So I did it. I basically did the same thing again. Like it was amazing. I moved home at that stage back to Dublin, but for that year that I was in London, I was just in a practice room, like literally putting in the work, because I knew I'd never have this point in my time of life ever again to actually put those hours in. So I just wanted to build a foundation and have all these tools, you know, in my, at my disposal, like technique, etc. Just I knew I'd never have that time again, so I just said I have to make the most of it. Plus, it was costing an absolute fortune, so I had to really justify being there. And I didn't really do the partying thing when I was in London, or like the pub thing. A few pints here and there, of course, but nothing like major. This was like serious time to really make it work. But it was at that point in time I really started to look at two things. The first thing was the orchestral trumpet playing, like to get a job in an orchestra. And my teacher at the time said for me not to really apply for anything unless I was going for a principal trumpet job, which I'm not quite sure if that was quite the right thing to say. But then the other side was that I really wanted to get into the movie side of stuff, but also recording some solo material of essentially songs that I really liked with strings. Was pretty much as simple as it was in my head. And he kind of said, no, just focus on the orchestral thing. So I did. I took his advice and I focused. He said there'll be plenty of time for that later on. I focused on the orchestral thing for a while. I did it like a couple of auditions that like I was not really at all anywhere ready for, like the London Symphony Orchestra job. I had no experience of playing principal trumpet. There was no way I was going to get the London Symphony. Like I sat in with them for their side-by-side scheme. I sat in with the BBC for their side-by-side scheme, but there was no way I was going to get a principal in the London Symphony Orchestra with zero orchestral experience. And also I just wasn't prepared for it enough for it. So anyway, I came back to Ireland and I just started to pick up work again. And then between the jigs and the reels, I kind of had a year or two where this idea was mulling around in my head of making the album of songs that I liked. I'd been exposed to a trumpet player called Chris Bodie, who I absolutely think is an incredible musician, and he's a lovely guy. I've since become friends with him. He's hugely successful. He does beautiful arrangements with orchestra and has an amazing band. So I kind of took inspiration. So, well, if he's leading the way of this, I'm going to just try and do my own style of recording these works. So I did, and the first album took like, it was such a process. It took 18 months to make, because I literally recorded with a piano initially, and I think it was piano, guitar and cello. And then something happened where someone couldn't show up for one of the sessions. Like I had to like work and save the money. I was living back at home, work and save the money, and then I put the money into the album, then work and save the money. So I ended up, it was only meant to be like 2 or 3 tracks or 4 tracks. And then it ended up, I was like, you know, I could push this out to 10 tracks. But then as it was going on, another musician came in and I heard an arrangement that they had made. And I was like, oh, that would be actually amazing. So I re-recorded all the previous stuff and put a string quartet on it as well. So it ended up like with like from 3, and then we added, you know, more strings. And that was done in a friend's house who had a gorgeous piano. They're amazing on Pro Tools, engineering, producing, and they're actually in a band, Sights, SIIGHTS. If you want to check it, it's like electro pop duo. They're really cool now. Like that's what she's doing now. But she's loads of experience. Mia Fitzgerald, she's loads of experience in the recording world. She'd worked with loads of great names in Ireland. So that album went out, and like 18 months later, and then I figured out all the fun side of the industry, like getting copyright clearance from the publishers, which takes forever, and then paying for the music that you're allowed to use, and printing the CDs and photo shoots and videos and all this sort of really stuff that you're kind of like, well, I used to just blow into this piece of metal behind me to make money and to enjoy myself, but now I'm spending more time on a computer than I am actually playing, as any of the independent artists will know out there. Yeah. And so essentially that's what happened. I put the album out, it went up on iTunes in Ireland, and like I had no idea how the classical or the charts or even where to put it in, how to do that. And then I went through CD Baby, the distributor, and the album went, like, it was the best-selling classical album of that day, or sort of that week, or whatever way I don't know how they do it. Like, it was you know the way to do it anyway. I certainly haven't figured it out. But I remember Andrea Bocelli had released an album that day, and the piano player Ludwig Einaudi, I don't think I pronounced that right, but anyway, he had Islands out at that day as well. But anyway, somehow this album of mine, self-titled, actually just went in, and it's just songs like a couple from Les Mis, one from Les Mis, Ave Maria, Damien Rice song, The Blower's Daughter, a Libertango, and lots of different stuff. So I went down this kind of crossover Moon River. I have two guests on it, actually. They've done brilliant since Brian Gilligan, who was starred in The Commitments on the West End. So he was a friend I knew from Artane, the band. He actually used to play clarinet in the band. He's got on to, he was on tour with Lion King, literally just as this world we live in came to a standstill. And so he did an Irish song, Carrickfergus, on that album. And Stephanie McKeown, who sang Autumn Leaves on it, she's done lots of stuff. I think she's had a role on Broadway as well, but she was about to open up as, I'm not sure the character, but one of the two lead characters in Frozen, alongside Samantha Barks from Les Mis, the movie. Stephanie McKeown is her name. And so they were my two guests on that album. And I thought then, making this album, like, I've gone this crossover, lighter route. I thought that, like, well, any chance of getting any classical solo performances are gone, like never again, you know, because sometimes it's looked on that you if you're going to cross over, you're not going to be playing the straight ahead classical repertoire.
What?
But anyway, and then like a year later, I got asked, would I do a concert with the National Symphony Orchestra of Ireland? And I sort of suggested, oh yeah, I'm thinking they wanted like one or two pieces or something short. And they said, no, we want you to do the whole concert. Like, it's a lunchtime concert. And the lunchtime concerts are great. They're about an hour long. They're live on radio on Lyric FM, who have been an amazing support to me. And they get quite good attendance. So I think that was 2013, after kind of doing a few small guest slots here and there in some of the smaller venues in Ireland. So I actually ended up playing the Haydn Trumpet Concerto and a piccolo trumpet piece, a Handel Suite in D. And then I do two brand new symphonic arrangements. So we went from 3 musicians to 6 musicians to then 90 musicians on a stage version of Ave Maria and Libertango. And it was amazing, and there was reviews, and it was an amazing feeling to do like basically 55 minutes of a concert with a full symphony orchestra, sold out, 1,200 people at the National Concert Hall. It's live on radio, and it went really well. And that's
such a big deal. That's a huge thing to be asked to do. Could you ever imagine when I've got to go back to what you said about your heart, like that's so shocking. I also feel like I should say to the listeners and people who are listening in, the way that this program works is that if I talk at the same time, it's not going to record what we're saying, and that's probably quite good, really, because when you were talking about your heart, I think instinctively a few swear words wanted to come out of shock, but I knew that if I spoke, the program that we're using wouldn't pick up what you're saying, and that was far more important than any sort of shock swear words that might come out of my mouth. But I can't imagine somebody telling me that my life's passion up to that point, that I wouldn't be able to do it anymore. I could imagine that would be devastated. Did you feel devastated? Did you have any other ideas of, oh, well, I could do this instead? Or was it like, this is my whole world crashing down right now?
Do you know, I didn't feel like it was the world crashing down, because I kind of just said, well, I'm just going to ignore this advice because I don't think it's correct. A lot of the time I found there'd be a lot of pressure on the heart when I'm kind of like, well, not really. Like I'm breathing in, and I'm just kind of thinking of it like I'm trying to separate taking something and saying, like, don't, like, probably more stress on the heart, like, running the marathon, of course, so I kind of I was a bit like, I kind of switched off. I think at the time I was a bit ignorant to it. I was just like, I'm not listening to this advice, because then my plans are gone, like, I was just real, stubborn, and that this is what I'm not going to do, and this is what I am going to do. And I've kind of stuck with that. If I felt something is right throughout, especially in this business, if certain obstacles come in your way and you're like, well, that's not quite right, so I just do this anyway, or I'll do that. And you just want to be fair, and you want to be straight down the line. And a lot of people were saying about the career, say, for example, like, you'll just lose loads of money, and you'll just do, like, you'll never get a gig as a solo trumpet show, and all this sort of stuff. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, that's definitely your opinion, and you're totally entitled to that, and you have a lot of experience if you're in this world, if you're managers or friends or colleagues. But I'm kind of going to do what I think I might be able to do anyway, and a lot of the time it's paid off, and some of the time I've been wrong. So I just kind of take everything as it comes, and kind of cross those bridges when we get to it. So, but there was actually, sorry, I know I mentioned the orchestra, National Symphony Orchestra performance. Just before that, there was a concert, a radio broadcast with the RTE Concert Orchestra. So it'd be similar to like the broadcasting orchestras in the UK, the BBC Symphony and the BBC Concert. So they used to do this concert called Mooney Tunes. It was presented by a gentleman called Derek Mooney, who was a radio presenter in Ireland. And he had sort of said to me, would you do a song? So I actually ended up taking another version of Libertango for the concert orchestra, which is 45 musicians. And that was actually I think that was my first solo orchestral experience. And that was 2,500 people in the Grand Canal Theatre. So that was amazing. That was another one. So that was just one song. So that was a nice kind of dip the toe in, and really enjoyed it. And then I think it was this concert then that came the year or so later. So that was the sequence of events then. And then from that, some arts festivals started requesting a kind of a mix of a show of Baroque and classical music, and then kind of finish off the concert with some of your lighter stuff. And it kind of just gave me encouragement to keep going and to explore options. And I always had an American dream, as they say. I just loved America for some reason. I don't know if it was to do with watching Baywatch when I was growing up, or what, any of those shows, but I just really wanted to work in America. I was obsessed with New York, and I'd been to New York a couple of times with the Artane band, in fact. But there was a brand of trumpets called Shilky trumpets that I remember when I was 15, actually. It was kind of around that time when all that stuff was happening, the youth orchestra stuff as well. I remember thinking, I don't know if it was my brother said to my mother, or someone said, my parents, like, he can't go in, he needs a professional trumpet. Maybe it was my teacher at the time that said, yeah, he needs a proper trumpet going in here to the youth orchestra, like I was using like something like, I don't know what I was using, like a very entry model junior trumpet. But anyway, I got this Shilky trumpet. It was recommended by John Walsh, a teacher, my teacher at the time. He was my first teacher outside of the band. And I loved it. I just like, this is like amazing. And I played that trumpet from like 15 right through to the Royal College of Music. And then when it came up to the time of doing this concert with the Symphony Orchestra, I was looking and I was like, well, I'm going to be playing a piccolo trumpet, I'm going to be playing the E flat trumpet, I'm going to be playing my B flat trumpet. So, and I'm looking at my case and I'm saying, like, Shilky are the best trumpets in the world. So for me, I love them. And I contacted them and I said, look, this is who I am. I said, this is what I've done so far in Ireland. I said, this is what I've got coming up at concert. And I said, and these are my plans for the future. I said, I think I was just honest and said, look, I'd love to become one of your performing artists. And I had no reply. And because, they get so many emails of requests, and these are like handcraft trumpets. And then I think I rang the factory a couple of weeks later, or the offices, and I said, just wondering if the president of the company, Andrew, got my email. He said, no, he's been away on holidays. Why don't you just resend the email? He's going to be in the office next week at about this time. So resend it so it goes to the top of his email pile. So I vividly remember setting my alarm so I would sync with Chicago time. So if he stepped in that office around 9 o'clock, that email would literally be the first email he would see when he opened his email. And then I got the reply and said, what are you after? And we really like what you're doing. We really like your plans. So since then, I've had an amazing relation. I've had like, I don't know, 5 or 6 trumpets from them. Like these are proper, someone described them once as a Steinway of trumpets. So that was one thing that I really, was like an artist deal. And it was like a dream come true for me. Like that was one of those pinch me moments. So that was all around the time of that concert at the Symphony Orchestra. And it all kind of started to kind of develop from there. At the time for that concert, I went over to a very famous trumpet player called Alison Balsam in the UK. And she gave me like a 3 or 4 hour lesson on the pieces I was working on. And so it was amazing. Like, it was just really great that it was all sort of starting to take shape.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. And I think I want to touch on one thing that you said earlier. And I find it myself, being a classical crossover artist, you do get that perception, or that people make an assumption that because you're crossover, you're not doing the proper classical stuff. And that doesn't sit well with me, because because just because I choose to do something for my solo career doesn't mean that I can't do the other stuff, or I wasn't trained in the other stuff. And I've been growing my YouTube for over a year now, and part of my reason for wanting to do that was to be able to display to people that I am more than just one thing. So I've put up classical arias on there, Chinese operatic arias, and then videos of me singing Tina Turner with a rock band, because she's amazing. But I grew up singing rock songs at karaoke's with my mum. And just because you are versatile doesn't mean that you can't do other things properly. Like, I've been trained properly in classical music and in opera. And so just because I choose to do a whole variety of things for my solo work doesn't mean that I can't do that other stuff. And sometimes that can be looked upon by people who maybe have less of an understanding of that in a less favourable way. However, I imagine when you contacted Shilky to say, I love your stuff, it's amazing, all these things that you've done, including your album and performing with lots of different bands and orchestras, could only have come across as surely being more impressive, because it shows how ambitious you are, and it shows all your different things that you're able to do, and it shows your love of music as well, that you want to do all these things. So I think I've always said personally that having more than one string to your bow is so important. It was a motto that was given to me when I was really little, to always have more than one string to your bow. And I think that's possible within a certain string. So if music is your main string, if you're able to perform with all these different ensembles and you're a recording artist in your own right, it's just more strings to your bow within that one string that I feel personally sets you up in such a good way for when opportunities come along. You know how to deal with certain things more because you've had that experience. And when you're able to say to the Steinway of trumpets, I've done all this stuff, like, surely that must have helped you with them.
Yeah, absolutely, it has. And it also, you don't have to be just in this box and I'm only playing orchestra music, or I'm only playing jazz music, or whatever it is. I was very grateful for those opportunities from the guys at Shilky, and since then, like, they've come to the concert where they've seen me play only, I would call it the lighter side of music, is what it kind of would be described as over there, like the pops music, you know. They saw a full concert of that, but in that concert there is like challenging, full-on, technically hard, ridiculous music, but it's also a 2-hour trumpet show. And there's not, no, I'll get onto those shows in a second and explain how that works. But most of the time, if you're in an orchestra, like say doing a classical symphony, you're not on for 2 hours solid just playing. You know, there's a lot of counting, there's a lot of rests. But I think I've been fortunate enough in Ireland to have the opportunity to play principal trumpet in like with the Irish Chamber Orchestra, with the RT Concert Orchestra, with the Symphony Orchestra, and now I'm principal trumpet for Wexford Festival Opera, which is, you know, we got, not this year, but a month basically in Wexford, sitting in a pit playing this glorious opera music. And so I still get to play the classical music, but also I played the Haydn Trumpet Concerto in Ireland like 6 or 7 times now. I played loads of Handel. I love the piccolo trumpet for all the Baroque music. I played Vivaldi Trumpet Concerto with Christian Steele Perkins last year, which was like the double trumpet concerto. He's obviously a legend. He played the Antiques Roadshow theme song. So although mainly in the US, I'm playing that music of the pops or lighter style, if most of the shows, not most of the shows, but about 50% I'd say of the shows in Ireland that I played like would be Eternal Source of Light Divine, Let the Bright Seraphim, and classical or Baroque repertoire. So that's something I feel very grateful to be able to play all this music. But I feel that by playing the songs and then bringing that back into the classical repertoire, it's only helped me. And I've always listened to opera singers all the time. I think we learn most from singers as musicians. I think what they do is amazing. And I think how to phrase music, and Angela Giorgio would be, Anna Netrebko, Renee Fleming, Pavarotti, all these huge opera stars. You learn so much by listening to how they phrase and how they sing. And don't be afraid to take chances. Don't be afraid to pull it back here or slow it down. And just as long as you're clear and everyone can follow. So I think it all just enhances and only really lends itself. They all come in together, and it just makes for more fun for you as a performer, and hopefully more enjoyable for the audience as a listener.
That's interesting you mentioned that you've been looking at singers, because I know that there's a quote that somebody said about you that say you sing with the trumpet. And I thought that was a really lovely thing to say. It just, you know, because I've had conversations on this podcast with a few singers now where they say that they feel like they relate most to songs that are being sung. And so I've said to them, you know, I feel the same way most of the time, but I think that's because I'm a singer. So I'm not sure if, as a listener, if I wasn't a singer, that I would feel that same way, or I just feel that way because I'm a singer. But then I was listening to your music before you were coming on the podcast, like your Danny Boy, for example. Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. And the way you sing that with the trumpet, your phrasing is incredible. I love how you pull things back and you play with the tone. And that's what I love doing when I sing. So it's really interesting for me to hear you say that. And to hear you say that you try and channel the way that singers sing. Is that something that you've always tried to do? Or
well, definitely since making the first album and kind of releasing myself from strict, rigid, you know, studies or technical work and all that sort of trumpet stuff that we get really bogged down on, but we don't learn. We always play with a metronome, we want to be in time. But since kind of just exploring and just listening, I think it was when I was at the Royal College that same teacher told me, you got to listen to opera singers and violinists and cello players. But for some reason it was the opera singers, and then I went to see lots of concerts with London Symphony and different, basically London Symphony concerts with opera singers, and I was just blown away. And I remember just saying, this is how it should, this is how something should be phrased. And I've always, as I say, I did my first singing gig like when I was 10 or 11 or whatever it was, and I've just never sang publicly since. But this is, I know it's a real cliche to sing like the trumpet is my voice, but I literally listen to opera arias and I'll try and play them on the trumpet how I would feel I would like to do it if I was actually singing. So I just love songs. I love like listening to Nat King Cole as well, and obviously Frank Sinatra, all the greats, and like they really all help develop, and you can only get better by listening to different styles of music and trying to, as I say, take the good bits from them and then bring them into, for me, my own playing, and for you, for your own singing. So yeah, it's absolutely something I always trying to do. Like if you look at Eternal Source of Light Divine, where the trumpet and the soprano are singing together, you know, it's like obviously a duet. Obviously I was at the Harry and Meghan's wedding it was performed beautifully. I think it was David Blackadder played trumpet. I think so. It was beautiful. It's one of my favorite pieces of music, and Alison Balsam's version is stunning. But it was Handel, or was it Bach, who said that the trumpets are the closest thing to singing angels that we have. So he always put the trumpets at the top of his scores. So you know, it's just something that I really just try and incorporate into my performance, just enjoying every moment and every note.
Yeah. Well, do you mind me asking then? Because I have said, when we've spoken about this on the podcast before, I've said we'll have to get an instrumentalist on just to talk to them about this, to see what they say. And you're the first one. So congratulations, you get to be asked this question about how you feel when you listen to songs that are either sung or played by instrumentalists. What do you feel really strikes you in the heart the most?
Okay, so the question is, what's the question is?
If you're listening to vocal music that's sung or played by an instrumentalist, which ones do you feel strike you in the heart more, that really invoke an emotional response more?
It definitely depends on who it is playing or singing. I know that's a real political answer. There's recordings where you're listening and you're like, that is amazing. And it kind of doesn't matter if it's a singer or a trumpet player or a violinist. I've sometimes I'm listening to an instrumentalist and they're still very much, especially now during lockdown, I've actually found a lot of orchestras and different musicians are putting up these videos, and it's kind of like they're in a straitjacket, and they're sticking rigidly to the tempo and the way they interpret stuff. They're afraid to let go just because that's what the rhythm says. You could be a bit looser with it there, or that's just my way of looking. But then on the other side, you're listening to people and you're going, oh, that's absolutely amazing. That's sublime what they're after singing or performing there. So I think it really does depend on the person, but it's very hard to beat Pavarotti singing anything.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that is the reason why I moved out of straight classical into crossover, is because I always loved playing with things, with the rhythms, with the tones, with how you sing it, with how it's recorded, with how you perform it live. I love messing with stuff like that. I think it's just because then you feel like you're putting your own stamp on it, rather than singing it straight. And I've said to a few people on the podcast before that I don't let perfection ride over the overall feel of a performance. So if I've done every rhythm perfectly as written in one performance, but then I've played with it a little bit more in the other performance, it might be that one has more emotion, and it's that I'm aiming for. I'm not aiming for perfection of the rhythms that are written. I'm aiming for that's the emotion of the song, what gets it across. So being able to play with that is a blessing, really, because as a musician myself, I want to portray emotion with the songs. And there was an amazing quote I know I've shared in this podcast before, but I love it. It was in one of my grandma's old singing books. And it was that I feel like music has this overall ability, but it talks about the voice. The voice has the ability and the power to paint in sound the colour of human emotions. And that's what I want to do with my music. If it's straight dead on rhythms, great, but where's the emotion?
Yeah. That's kind of when I found with, say, the Haydn trumpet concerto performances, the more I played it performing with an orchestra, which is obviously an amazing treat to do anytime. Anything with an orchestra is amazing. I found I was getting freer, but especially on the second one. The first two movements are fairly metronomic, but the second movement, it's basically a song without words. And I really get to have fun with that when I'm playing it now. And it's really great to be able to have a conductor who can react to what you're doing and follow. And we're very fortunate here in Ireland, actually, that we've great conductors that can follow you. But also in the interpreting of a song. So on more or less all of my lighter shows, if you want to call it that, my wife has been the guest vocalist. Shona, she's not the guest vocalist, like joint headline show pretty much. And it's amazing that we get to travel and we get to do all these things together. It's so much fun. Like performing in America, you know, to anything from our first show was like 500 and a seater venue, and then the last one was like 2,200 seater venue. But getting to hear her, I've learned an awful lot from her in the way she interprets a song, and it won't be the same every night. So we're kind of bouncing off each other, and we're feeling a different vibe, and maybe she could gets a vibe from me if I'm playing something one way before her, but it would generally be her, and I'd be listening to her and the way she'd be holding something up, and it's just amazing to make sure that every performance isn't the same. It's always, the audience is getting something different every night. It keeps it fresh for us as the performers, and it keeps it everyone on their toes, so it doesn't feel like they're just getting a metronome. If they wanted to hear anything, they just put on the CD. Do you know what I mean? If they wanted to hear the same. So yeah, it's great, and it's all about the interaction. And the audience, you can't fool that. You can't make that up. That's just something that happens naturally, and it's real or it isn't real. So she's an amazing vocalist, and I first met her on a musical theatre show here in Ireland, and I was in the band, and she was actually playing the character of Yum Yum in the Hot Mikado. So I just turned to the guy beside me, the trombone player, Carl, and I said, "Who's Yum Yum?" I said, "Oh, that's Shona." And I said, "All right, yeah." Anyway, it wasn't until 9 months later we actually ended up going on a date, and then 8 years later we're married now. We'll be married 2 years in January, and we've traveled, like, done lots of venues in America. We've done a couple of cruise gigs. We've done lots of theatre shows here in Ireland, maybe 20 or 30. And anytime I'm doing anything on that non-classical stuff, like it's the two of us, you know, because that's when I was talking about the 2-hour show earlier on. Like I wouldn't physically be able to play non-stop for 2 hours, but I am pretty much on the stage for most of it. But I have these moments that we share, and then Sean obviously has her own solo stuff as well on the show. So it's great, because again, I wouldn't go, if someone said there's a 2-hour trumpet player, or there's a concert with a trumpet player playing for 2 hours, I'd probably say that's lovely, I hope it goes well. I wouldn't go to the concert, but if it was a 2-hour trumpet concert where you're going to have these incredible guest vocalists or instrumentalists, or the musicians that are going to be featured, like, I always think the best thing you can do for me as a performer is don't take all the limelight. Like it's a bit weird. Like I always love, so when we book our musicians in the States, we always try and find musicians who are sort of solo artists as well, because like at the end of the day, we're playing music. Everyone has to, you're a solo artist, but everyone does other gigs as well and other types of work. Sorry, you know, they're just musicians. They're not like, I don't see people as orchestral, classical, whatever. They're just musicians. And we always ask them, like, will you do a couple of features? Like, would you like to do them? And you're free to pick whatever you want. And so we've had some amazing musicians where they've done these really cool versions of a Stevie Wonder song. And then we always ask them if it was possible to learn like any Irish song they want to do and just put their like jazz take on it, or whatever way they want to interpret it. So it's about sharing the stage. And I think Sting was the one to say, you have to stand on the, what is it, the shoulders of giants or something. Like, basically surround yourself with the best musicians you can possibly find wherever you are, and it's only going to make the overall experience. So it's not about that's the lead guy or that's the lead girl or that's the solo performer. It's about an experience for people who are giving up a Saturday night or a Friday night, and they're going for dinner, and they're getting taxis in, or they're getting lifts or hotels, or they're flying in to see you, which is, we've had that, which has been so amazing to meet people, and they're spending really a lot of money. Like, it's not just the ticket price, there's an awful lot of money, so you have to give them the best experience possible, and they have to leave and say, I really just, I'm so happy I came to that, I'm delighted, I enjoyed that event. So it's about, as I say, this experience for everyone, and it's not just a showman, it's like the whole team. It's a team, everything is a team effort, from the sound and the lights, just to make it the best possible, as I say, experience for the audience.
That sounds amazing. Can I come? I'd love to come to one of those shows. No, that's absolutely brilliant. And what an amazing thing that you get to go with your wife as well and perform with your wife. That's amazing. Do you find that you really understand each other's drive with music because you're both musical yourselves? Do you find that helps quite a lot?
When you say drive, you mean like kind of pushing forward and kind of developing all the time. And
determination and drive, yeah, because you've got to have a good amount of it to be a solo performing artist and an independent musician.
Yeah, well, how it happened? So Shona was always singing. She actually started as an Irish dancer. Like, she's so many awards and medals for Irish dancing. She
Wow.
stopped that, started singing like in her teens, and she's also a psychotherapist as well. So she's an all-rounder.
She's a
And
very clever lady, holy moly.
it's all funny. It all sort of happened around the time we met, that like the artist deal happened and the concert happened, and I just released the first album at this stage, and then we met, and then she has seen like a show go from like 5 people showing up to a show to the 2 of us performing together to 2,500 people in the States. So she's with me every step of the way, and it's I don't feel like, obviously for the classical stuff, that's I'm on my own, like this classical trumpet thing, but for the crossover show, it's definitely a team effort. And like you're sitting in a car for 8 hours driving to the next venue overnight, and then there's like the band are there as well, everything. Like, so we've done everything from like a 3-piece show, which is just Shona, myself, and the piano player in America, up to our full band, piano, bass, drums, guitar, and a symphony orchestra behind us. So it's gone from like literally the smallest to like the biggest we could do. And I remember we ended up in a place, Annapolis, in where is it? It's just outside Washington, and we family there, and we're doing a concert in, I can't remember the name of the place. It was just outside Annapolis, like a few minutes, and they said, that's like 15 minutes from us, will you come and stay with us? And we were like, yeah, absolutely. So this is long lost sort of Shona's mother's cousin in America, right? And they owned a B&B. The chap said to me, the Marty, lovely guy, said, so what's like, what do you see with this, like, developing? And I said, well, to be honest, if we could just continue doing exactly what we're doing, we would be absolutely delighted. Like, so the real moments, like that was an 1,800 seater venue, and after it he was like, yeah, I get what you're talking about now, you know. So like, there was only 3 of us on stage and 1,800 people there, and every show we did in the States got a standing ovation, which was amazing. And people, as I say, they'd fly over. Like, so we've had people from the West Coast fly over to the East Coast. We've had East Coast fly over to the West Coast. We've had people from the East Coast fly over to Ireland. We've had people who have really traveled, and we always meet with people after, love to hear their stories. And a lot of them have Irish connections, and sometimes they're expecting just an Irish show, but that's only like a small bit we do at the end, an Irish set. And but they love to connect with it and tell you about their grandfather, their great grandfather, etc. was Irish. And I actually love those stories. Some people think every American thinks they have a claim to be Irish. I actually love hearing these stories because they're really interesting, and inevitably you get a bit of a connection there as well. But sometimes they get things mixed up, and you're kind of trying to, oh no, this is the country, that's not the west of Ireland, that's the east of Ireland, or whatever. And but it's great that you get so many people that will travel, and like such dedication, which is amazing. Like, and they become really good friends. Some of them have, and which is really nice. But someone's like, yeah, we took a 3-hour flight, but we had to do a 2-hour drive to get to the airport because they live in like the middle of nowhere. That I've never heard of. A 2-hour flight, 3-hour drive, and then another hour, and then they're staying for a night, and then they're flying back out. And you're kind of like, yeah, you literally, I could get from Ireland to New York in that time. Like, thank you so much for making this journey, you know. So it's great to see the reaction. And as I say, we've developed the show so much, like that it's now like a joint headline show with Shona and myself. And I just learn so much from her. She kind of keeps me calm because I get about 2 hours before the show, I just start getting a bit like, right, I just want kind of not to talk to anyone. I just want to get ready, have a bit of water, and just kind of, the most difficult part for me is the, you're probably not thinking now because I'm just talking so much, but it's the talking to the audience. And kind of, when we open the show, we open with a couple of songs, and then I speak for the first time, and it's all tied in together. And it's that first bit of dialogue, I feel, is the moment you have to get people relaxed straight away. Well, from the start where you're playing, but like that they know what they're in for the night, and it's generally just loads of jokes, loads of fun, and it's not serious. It's just like, just forget your worries, leave them at the door. Let's just enjoy ourselves for the next couple of hours, and sit back, relax, and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, you're definitely selling it to me. As soon as COVID allows, I want. Yeah, as soon as COVID allows us to, I'd love to come and see the show. It sounds absolutely amazing. I've always tried myself to have guest artists, but the guest artists that I like to bring in are mainly children's choirs, just because they are so cute and so lovely, and I didn't really have many opportunities to perform when I was growing up. So if I can give opportunities to little ones in my shows, then I love doing that so much. And you're right, it really does add something different to the show. It's a really lovely thing to be able to do. And also I had my Christmas at the musicals with my friend Joanna, and Joanna Forrest, she's a fantastic soprano. She's really amazing, and she is just the nicest person. But for me, like, my main inspiration organising that show was because I do everything by myself. And so I thought, let's come up with a concept that means I get to tour the country with my best friend. Like, why not do that? And so, like, I absolutely love that so much, performing with Joanna, and it really just made the whole process so much more enjoyable, even though I loved it to begin with. So the idea of being able to tour and perform with your other half, I mean, that just sounds incredible. I'd love to drag Rich along and get him on stage, but nobody'd want to hear that. Like,
Yeah, no, we have been incredibly fortunate, and we don't take it for granted. We really, like, we could be sitting here watching TV and we'd be just like, well, do you remember that show? Wasn't that amazing when an actual cowboy came to our show called Butch, you know, or all these different funny things, like, and really interesting things, and just kindness shown by people. And we've been so fortunate. Now, we had, like everyone, we've been all affected by this COVID. We had plans for November, and we had an entire tour for next year. But then there's all these, so we get these 3-year visas. So they're artist visas. You're an alien of extraordinary ability, is what they call them. So you get these 3 years.
Yeah, it's funny how they call you an alien.
And the first question in the interview is, have you any Grammy Awards, Mr. O'Sullivan? And I'm just like, not yet. But
yet.
So,
that's the main word, though, is yet.
And then so we got these 3-year visas. So our visas are up now, and we were literally about to reapply. But because of this situation, we don't know when we will actually be able to go back. So there's no point in getting our visas. So the promoter was like, I've literally had so many international acts had to put out because of this. We're going to just put it on hold for the next year, the next season. So essentially next year is wiped out as well, but that's fine, because like we've lots of stuff going on here. We're very lucky in Ireland now. That's obviously if it gets back to normality. But that's one thing. We've always wanted to work so much in America, and we put the time in over there for that year when we went to Los Angeles, and we kind of came back for a few different things, and went to Nashville for a presentation. And then we had decided we wanted to like live in Ireland. So we live in Dublin, and we feel really lucky that we can go to America to do our work. But we've done like work in Asia as well, for a charity in Yangon, in Myanmar, and that was for an orphanage with deaf kids and kids with HIV, and there was an actual just full-on orphanage where kids were abandoned. So we went over to Myanmar. We were approached by Music for Myanmar, and they asked us, will you come over and do a performance? We'll like fly over, you'll be 5-star hotel, etc. So we're saying, okay, we're looking up Myanmar and Burma, and they're like, don't go near the place, basically, is what we're seeing. So I contacted someone that did the show the previous year. I said, what do you think to this? They said, do not even question it, just go, say yes, and just go. And we said, okay. So we were due to fly out to Los Angeles, and for the first set of our last tour, and first set of dates on the West Coast. And we said, well, we can go on these dates, but we, instead of flying to Dublin, can you send us to Los Angeles instead? So essentially in that week, we did an entire loop around the globe. And we went over to Myanmar, and it was the most humbling, but like, as I say, we've always been very grateful and appreciate what we've had, and we're very lucky, but it was the most amazing experience of our life. We literally were fighting back the tears, seeing the conditions that these kids are living in. And it's really strange then to go to a 5-star hotel where they're basically treating you like superstars. And it's a bit strange because you're going out there to do a concert, and it was so touching. And I have a feeling we'll be going back again in a couple of years whenever this resumes. But it was amazing. I think we got 40,000 American dollars raised in that week. And we had it was possibly the most amazing experience of our life. It was something, we're so lucky here in Ireland, despite all problems and in Ireland, UK and Europe, all this kind of nonsense, but we are still so fortunate that we were, by lottery or by chance, we were born into these countries with all these facilities, like running water, like a bed, all these very simple basic things that we brought a cake to one of the orphanages, like just a couple of cakes for them and this was like, they will only have cake once a year until the next guest. Like it's so strange, and it's a different world away. But what's actually, this is actually really bizarre. They all have smartphones with with internet. That's all. It makes it it's a bit odd, a bit strange, but that all they want was Wi-Fi and phones. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. So we have got to do these cool things again together and experience them together. So it's really been a blessing to do it together and experience these moments.
Wow. I think if I had to prioritize between an iPhone and cake, I'd take the cake.
Yeah.
Gosh, the difference between the 5-star hotel and the orphanage,
so we had to get on a boat to go across to this island, and it was just like you see in the movies, like just like mud all over, and then like these little dirt roads, and like what you'd see sometimes on the top of a roof, like an industrial roof, that metal sort of ripple effect kind of roof. That was how their home or their shack is. And the bed is literally just a big plank of wood on raised, just raised about that much off the ground. Just a huge plank of wood with like obviously support underneath it, and a lino as the kind of mattress and the sheet. And that was it. Like, it was no blankets, no, I can't even remember cushions, but the whole thing that was like the boys' room. Like it was, 10 boys in that big long plank of wood, and then the girls' room was the same. So it was quite amazing to experience all that.
that's so upsetting.
Yeah.
And yet I still can't get in my head how they had smartphones. If they're like, I'd be like, can I have a blanket, please?
They're like those really cheap ones that don't really work anyway, kind of thing. I think, it was, I don't think they would have cost all that much. Like, it was very, very strange.
Wow. You kind of wonder if somebody had generously bought them for them, so they had a way of connecting with the outside world, or, because there's so much you can educate yourself with if you've got access to the internet. Maybe it was something like that, but I can't imagine going and experiencing something like that as well. But like, the fact that you were able to raise so much money for them was incredible. Do you know what that money was going towards?
So they would give a percentage of that money to that particular orphanage out on the island, and so they would the previous year they'd given them money to buy some clothes that would enable them to set up a shop. So it would supply clothes for all the people around the village. The year before, they got them a moped, and they used so they could rent it out. So the money goes to make them make the orphanage owners self-sufficient. And so they can generate some income. I'm not sure exactly where that money went for that year, but I'm sure it was a really interesting project that we'll hear more of. And then the other bit of the money went into the orphanage for deaf kids. They set up a beauty salon, and so where the school is in an area where there's lots of embassies. So all the people from the embassies will come in and get their nails or their hair and stuff. So it's like proper beauty. Like, we went in, they had all the uniforms and everything. It was really amazing. So the money is raised. in order that it can generate more money. And some basic stuff like clothes and food, etc. So yeah, it was quite extraordinary.
That's really interesting and really clever. I just want to know more about this now. You'll have to send me a link or something so that I can do a bit of research. I want to find out more about it. So yeah, if you send me that, I'll put it in the description below so that people can also have a look if they're interested. But I know that you've done, I mean, this is just one story of charity work that you've done, but you've done so much more, haven't you?
Yeah, in Ireland, we did a full orchestra concert for the Jack and Jill Foundation, Sean and myself and Simon Morgan at tenor. And that was, again, in National Concert Hall. That was sold out. Don't actually know how much exactly was raised, but it was a great opportunity to showcase the works from the second album that I made, and to play it with the actual orchestra who recorded the track. So that was the RT Concert Orchestra. So I'll touch on that now in a second, but basically that event was sold out. It was the CEO of the charity. It was his last event. So it was kind of his big last hurrah. And then there was lots of press and lots of radio about it. So that was a great success. And then the Peter McFerry Trust, which looks after, it tries to deal with the homeless crisis, people sleeping rough or people without accommodation. So I've done quite a few with those. Sean and myself as well did our full-on Christmas show. Was it last year or the year before? I think it was the year before. And that was amazing. That was a church of 800 people, but yet there was over 1,000 tickets sold. So, and I think there was I can't remember the ticket price, but there was €24,000 raised. So that goes directly to Father Peter McFerry, who's looking after food and essential supplies and sleeping bags and tents and whatever is needed. So that's kind of outside of the work in Yangon, in Myanmar. That's where most of the stuff would have happened. Now we haven't like millions of concerts, but anytime something presents itself, that's kind of the charity that I think is quite worthwhile and extraordinary.
It sounds it. Gosh, that sounds amazing. Yes, we'll have to put links in the description so that
I'll send you over everything.
Thank you. Yeah, that'd be great. Now I know that with COVID going on, we've all had to change our various plans and paths and stuff. But before I ask you where you're thinking that this journey of music might take you next, I just want to talk about one last thing, because it blew my mind when I saw it. I just thought this is amazing and what a cool thing to be able to say that you've done. And that is that you've performed on stage with Josh Groban himself. And I just, please tell me the story behind that, because I'm very interested. I want to know.
So we've a TV show here called The Late Late Show. It's an Irish TV show. It's a really long running chat show. And essentially they would need guest musicians for, to backing musicians, like for Michael Bublé or Tom Jones, all these names. And some of it's live, some of it might not be live. But anyway, you do the show anyway, you're paid to show up. And the singers are always live, by the way. Singers are 99% live. Good. So you get to meet, I've met loads of the big names over the years, and Josh Groban was one of them. And I remember he came out with this album then a few years later, and I think it was called Stages. And Chris Botti, that trumpet player I mentioned early on, recorded the trumpet solo for Old Devil Moon. And then Josh was going on tour, and it was a trumpet player in a concert orchestra. This is, as it's amazing how the series of events happens. A trumpet player who used to be my old teacher in the concert orchestra was asked, would he be available for this? And he sent me a message and said, would you be available, Niall, to do this? Because this is probably more your bag than mine, he said, so more your cup of tea, basically. I said, yeah, absolutely delighted. But before that, I had only been talking to a conductor called Sean O'Loughlin, and he is an American-Irish conductor from Syracuse in New York, and he was with IMG. I think he's still with IMG Artists. And I was just saying, do you want to start working on some shows together in America, because we're getting the visas in place and all that? And he said, I'm actually in Ireland in a couple of weeks doing conducting a Josh Groban. Are you playing on it? And I hadn't been asked this. I said, no. I replied, I said, no, I haven't. I haven't been asked that, but I'll probably end up going to the show. because I've gone to a couple of Josh Groban shows. I said, I'll probably be going to the show if I'm not working, and we can have a pint or a coffee before or after, or pint after, coffee before the show. And he said, okay, brilliant, no problem, he replied. And I think it was like 5 minutes later, I got a text message, are you available for the following Josh Groban dates? And I just go, oh yeah, turns out I'm doing the gig after all. And that's as simple as it was, and straightforward. So the Josh, and then that was lovely. I have a video up on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and all that sort of stuff with the old Evan Moon, the live version from the Dublin show. So it was the shows in Belfast and shows in Dublin. And then as a result of that, Sean and I have gone over to Syracuse, and Sean has conducted us with the Symphony Orchestra in Syracuse, which is a huge venue. And we had the best time there with that orchestra. Such a good orchestra, really nice people. And Sean conducting was absolutely brilliant. And it's amazing how these connections, like one simple email that I sent ended up not resulting in me getting the Josh Groban gig, but ended up working with this guy who was on the same gig, who then, because he could just get the email and say, well, I don't know what this guy sounds like, I don't know what he's like as a person, how they are to work with, etc. But they've welcomed us with open arms, and as a result, we were meant to go back in November in a couple of weeks or 2 months. That's obviously not happening. That was a connection with the piano player that was on that show, and he's a university, and he wanted me to come over and give some lectures and master classes and performances. But it's all these connections, and this is what's so fun about like chatting with you today and meeting with you through Grace. It's all these, you never know where they're going to lead to. So like the album made with the concert orchestra was Niall O'Sullivan and friends. Now, I wasn't friends with everyone on the album. Like, for example, Julian Lloyd Webber produced the album alongside Gavin Murphy, who did extraordinary arrangements for the band and the concert orchestra. So that was one of those moments where Julian was just finishing up his career playing the cello due to his back injury. And I heard it on the radio, and I said, I'm going to be producing an album. I'm going to be making an album with an orchestra. I don't know when, but I'm going to do it. And Julian's going to produce it. I didn't even think, I hope Julian produced it. I just heard this interview and I said, that guy would be extraordinary to have produced the album for his wealth of knowledge. Like, and I've obviously been, a fan of his for years. And I was like, Julian would be amazing for this. So I heard this interview and I said, right, that's the producer. I spoke to Gavin, who's also, Grammy nominated producer and arranger for his work with Celtic Woman. I said, Gavin, I'm going to do an album with the orchestra. Will you kind of oversee it, produce it, and go and ask Julian Lloyd Webber, will you arrange it? He said, yeah. And I said, I'm going to get a guest artist. So I got a chap called Emmett Cahill from Celtic Thunder. They're a huge performing show in the States, and Lisa Lamb, who was on a show called Celtic Woman. And now she's a huge solo artist in her own right. She just did the Maria Keaton Foundation with Gary Barlow and Ronan Keaton there last week. So she's flying. And then I had worked with Daniela Denise when I was in as an extra player with one of the orchestras in Ireland. So Daniela Denise, the opera star, superstar, she's in Glyndebourne. So she came on board and did a track. We recorded that in Angel Studios in London. And then Kim Criswell, who I'd done a couple of recordings with, again in the orchestra and with concert as a freelance orchestra and a concert orchestra, and contacted her, and she was involved. And I was like, this is amazing. All my favorite artists are coming on board. And then Larry Carlton, who is this multi-Grammy winning jazz guitarist, he's like the sound of all, he's like a huge session player, but as a solo artist, he's so many albums. Like, he's just a superstar jazz guitarist, and he came on board. So all these factors came in with the band and the orchestra. And it's amazing how these connections through, say, doing the work with orchestras can lead to a collaboration with them on your album. And Larry, who actually we've never actually met, but we spoke only through email. It's amazing the world we live in now that we can do those type of recording sessions. Funny enough, one of the shows in the States, Larry and Sean and I were in the same village, the same town at the same time in Oregon. And we both had shows on the exact same night, and both shows were sold out. So I contacted him, but he wasn't able to meet. He was like literally getting on the road and heading off the next day. So we'll definitely meet someday. But it's all about connecting and making the connections with people. I wouldn't say it's networking, because it's more, you're actually doing something fun. You're making a great product, and So that album, Niall O'Sullivan and Friends, that was released in 2015 in Ireland, and then I've just kind of put it out everywhere else this February, just gone, and that's been very good, and that's opened lots and lots of doors. I guess with the names involved, people are looking at it and saying, okay, this is probably worth having a little more than 5 words of the first email. We'll maybe give it a few more minutes, you know. So that's allowed us to open doors and knock on doors. And I was mentioning earlier before we started, it was almost signed to a major label, and then there was another offer from another label that was not worth considering. And so I've kept control of it. I still own the product, still CDs for sale. In fact, some orders came in yesterday, and then every so often you get your statement to every 4 times a year to say this is as many people bought it. So it's great to still have that. So now I need to start planning the next album and figuring out what direction that's going to be. But I think we'll see what the lay of the land is in the next couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. And you very kindly said that if people contact you, quote in the podcast, that you'll quite happily sign their CD for them for free on top, which is very nice of you. So thank you very much. We can put the link in the description, yeah?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's very nice of you. So, ladies and gents listening and friends, why don't you pop over to the description and order your album, because if you mention the podcast, you can get it signed as well, which is very kind of you. So thank you very much for that. But these opportunities you're talking about, it really is amazing to think about just where these connections can come from. You never know who you're going to meet, and you never know who they know. And so these opportunities are amazing. And I always say to the young musicians that I work with to make the most of every single opportunity, but it doesn't have to be one that comes along when the phone rings. You can create these incredible opportunities for yourself, and you can create these doors for yourself as well. And it really sounds like you're doing such an incredible job of that. And I wonder where these opportunities and doors are going to take you next. What are you thinking for the future?
Yeah, I'm not sure. At the moment, we had a show. I just heard like earlier this week, Columbia Artists Management have just are going into liquidation. I think they're just like ceasing operation.
No
one of the biggest
way.
in the world, during pop shows. So I was talking to them earlier on before all this happened about quite a large scale show that I wouldn't see me. It would see me produce it. Because I love the production side of things as well. I was thinking I might conduct, because I have a bit of a conducting experience. I might conduct, I might do a little bit of playing, but I'd be more wanting to produce it. And so that was quite a large scale touring production. That's no longer happening unless they can continue with the show independently. But who knows what's laying ahead. So this is playing havoc with everyone and everyone's livelihood and stuff. So my family are healthy, and we're staying positive, and that's all we can do. I know, you know, we all have our moments where we're just like, I can't actually believe this is actually happening. It's surreal. So it's lots of Zoom calls, lots of Zoom quizzes and family meetings and interviews, and it's keeping me on my toes and sane. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm really pleased to hear that you're looking forward to creating your next album. So I'll have to have you on the podcast again when you've got an update for us and you can tell us about which opportunities have come through for you and which doors have opened since this podcast recording. So that would be really great. But on that exciting note for the future, I'm going to say thanks ever so much for coming and being so generous with your time and sharing your stories and really opening up so much about, the things that you've been through with your heart as well. It's really kind of you to share so much of yourself with us. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful.
You're very welcome, and thanks for having me on. A nice way to start the week.
I'm glad you think so. I feel like that as well. I've so enjoyed talking to you and hearing your stories. So I'll look forward to having you on the podcast again. But for now, I'm going to remind everybody to go and get their signed copy of your album using the links in the description. And also, we've put your bio below if they want to find out more about you, as well as your links and your social media links as well. So if you are able to now go over and follow and subscribe and like, then please do, because it helps us out an awful lot. And while you're here, please do subscribe to this channel so that you'll be updated when we get you on again, Niall, because I think that'd just be amazing if you can come on and update us. So thanks ever so much for coming and sharing so much of yourself and your time with us. And I'll speak to you again soon on the podcast, I'm sure.
Great. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.